So welcome to AGA Online Learning, where we're going to be looking at a case study for Amharic language, particularly grammar, syntax, and morphology. We're going to be looking at different case studies, different books, different manuscripts, etc. I wanted to start off with something which is non-religious but related to Ethiopia itself, integrally. My Life and Ethiopia's Progress. This is an autobiography by His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie. And we also have the translation by Edward Ullendorff. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the writings of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie and also the translation itself by Edward Ullendorff and how that translation came to be. What was the linguistic process for drawing up the translation, which was concluded by Ullendorff. So we're going to be making somewhat of our own translation also and looking at the grammar, syntax, and morphology. If you enjoy the content, if you enjoy this video, then please make sure to subscribe, and we will be continuing to look at this particular book as a case study and also in the future as well. Some different books, manuscripts, anything that our viewers have interest in, and also is a good case study for learning the grammar, syntax, morphology of the Amharic language. So we're going to be taking this small paragraph from the book. This is literally in the first chapter. Okay, so I'm going to read it in Amharic first, and then we can read it in English or read it nice and slowly. ከዚህም በኋላ በያንዳንድ ስራ ላይ እየሾሙ ብዙ ጊዜ ፈትነው ለመንግስታቸው ስራ ታማኝና ትጉ መሆናቸውን አጼ ምኒልክ ስለተረዱት 24 ዓመት ዕድሜ ሳሉ በ1868 ዓመተ ምህረት የባላምባራስነት ማዕረግ ሾሟቸው። በዚሁም ዘመን የሕግ ሚስታቸውን ወይዘሮ የሺመቤትን የኔን እናት አገቡ። Okay, so we're going to be breaking this apart. Okay, so this is the translation which we have from Ullendorff for what we just read. Subsequently, since King Menelik had become convinced of Makonan's loyalty and skill in the service of his government, having tested him many times in various tasks to which he had appointed him, he raised him to the rank of Balambaras, which we're going to look at. Ullendorff hasn't translated that, he's left it in its transliterative form. The rank of Balambaras when he was age 24 in the year 1868, and this would translate to 1876 in the Gregorian calendar. At this time, Makonnen married Weziro Yeshimebet, my mother, as his lawful wife. Okay, so we got two elements to this paragraph, what it's explaining. The first is about his father, Ras Makonnen, or King, Ras Makonnen, and his elevation by King Menelik to his governmental rank and the testing and trialing that he went through in order to get there. And then also, at the same time that he married the mother of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie, Wezero Yeshimebet. Okay? And it says, my mother as his lawful wife. So we're going to look at according to each clause. Okay? So every sentence may just be one clause. That means it's a simple sentence. It may be a compound sentence, meaning that it's two clauses joined together by a conjunction. It also might be a complex sentence, which is a clause joined to another subordinate clause through a subordinate conjunction. So we're going to be looking at what a lot of that means and how these grammar systems are used in the Amharic language and how we translate and how we derive translations from the original text. So we're going to be breaking it up like this. Okay. Um, this is not necessarily clause by clause, but um, each part of speech, okay, with its morphological breakdown. Morphological breakdown is very important because there's lots of morphemes being parts of a word which make up the entire meaning of a word. There's a lot of morphemes which make up the meaning, so we have to look at those in detail. But I've broken up the sentence, okay? So that's your grammatical structure, and in yellow you have your morphological structure, and then we'll look at how the syntax differs in the English language straight after. So the first word is kazimboala. Kazimboala, okay? In that word, we have the preposition ke, we have izi, which is a demonstrative pronoun, meaning it means here, but in this sense, it means this, okay? And then we have m at the end, which means also, or and, but usually also. And then we have another preposition be and a postposition hoala being used together. And this just means after, okay? So if we look at the meaning of these together, kazim, which is joined together, kazim, which is from here. Also from here, behwala, after. Kazim, from here also, after, but we wouldn't just use the literal meaning, okay? Because when it comes to translative work, we cannot just use a literal translation and expect the meaning to have the same effect in the other language. So we have to use somewhat of a semantic translation. We wouldn't say in English, no, at no point in the English language would it be appropriate to say, or you know, in not in common speech or common text anyway, you wouldn't see somebody saying, from here also after. That's a bit of a mouthful. You would say after this, but Ullendorff uses the word subsequently. Subsequently. Okay, so now we have our first opening to the paragraph. And this is a discourse marker as well. This is a discourse marker stating that we're going into a different part of the discourse now. After this, okay, so we're not talking about the thing that happened prior, but we're talking about the thing that happened after, subsequently. This is a discourse marker. Okay, Kazim Boala, this is a very common discourse marker in the Amharic language. If we're explaining a story, even if we want to tell the story of our own life, just like His Majesty here is doing about his father, he says Kazim Boala. Okay. Beyandan Siralai, Beyandan Siralai, Be and Sira Lai. Okay. Be and Lai is a preposition and a postposition. Be, usually meaning in or with or through, depending on the context. But when you use it with this postposition Lai, it actually means over or on top of. Okay, so anything that goes in between the preposition and the postposition be and Lai, the sentence means being on top of that thing which has gone in between there. So what has gone in between there? And sira. And means some or certain or um, uh, various. It could mean something like this. But some of what or certain of what? Sira. Okay. The direct translation of sira would be work. Ullendorff uses the word tasks, and this is much more appropriate for the translation in order to make it make sense. If we were writing a formal, autobiography, we wouldn't say, we've got to understand that this is the emperor speaking. So Ullendorff has to represent the integrity of his speech as a non-native English speaker by translating his Amharic, which is very formal, to formal English also. But if he was to make a literal translation, it wouldn't come across very formal. So we wouldn't say certain work, we wouldn't say over certain work, we would say over certain tasks. Okay. And then we have iya shomu. Iya shomu. Okay. And these two go together. Iya is a prefix which can be added onto the simple past verb. And the simple past verb is what you see here. Shomu. Shomu means um, uh, he, she, formal, okay, the same form as they. He, she, formal, appointed. It could also mean in the sense of, in a ecclesiological sense, it could mean he ordained. But in this sense, since we're talking about appointment to governmental offices, he says iyeshomu, iyeshomu. And iya can be translated to, it's a prefix, but it can be translated to while, while. But a lot of the time, um, even though this is not the gerundive form, and the gerundive form is when you add another verb onto the main verb in a clause, we're using the word ing, okay? Iya can often work as being translated into the gerundive form. And here that works very well, actually. So we'll look at that in just a moment. So we can look at iyeshomu as while appointing or appointing, okay? And this is not making sense at the moment. Why? Because the syntax in the Amharic language, the sentence structure is almost backward. So every clause that we put together, we have to read it backwards in order to get the the full English meaning. Okay, so what comes after? Büzu, gize, fetno. Okay. Büzu, gize, fetno. So bizu essentially means many or a lot. Gize means time. Many of us who are familiar with some Amharic reading or Amharic words, we should be quite familiar with these two words. Bizu means a lot. Gize means time. Feteno. Feteno. What could this mean then? So feteno comes from the dictionary form verb fetena, which means to test. Okay, if any of us are familiar with Abata Chinhoy, our Father who art in heaven, when we say lead us not into temptation, we say weda fetenam atagban. Okay, do not lead us into temptation. So fetena can mean he tempted or trialed, okay, or tested. So there's different connotations, there's different meanings that come into this. But here he tested him, okay. Bizugize fetnao, okay, testing many times. Who is he testing? He's testing, um, it's King Menelik, as we're going to see, testing or trialing Mekonnen, the father of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie. Okay, so fetana, it's a verb which is, we're going to look at in some later courses the different types of verb types and classes and how they conjugate. Okay, but essentially, what we need to understand is that I said that this can be looked at like gerundive, but it's actually the iya is actually a prefix which would better translate as while. Okay, but this is the gerundive. So the gerundive in the English language is, as I said, a verb which is added onto the main verb. It's additional to the main verb, but in the same clause, because any normal clause can only have one main verb, but we can add another verb on, okay, to add to the main verb, and in this sense, it's testing, and the ing indicates that it's the gerundive. Okay, so testing many times. Okay, then we have le mengistacho but I've broken up Mengist and Acho because Acho is a possessive. And in this sense, it could mean there in another context, but here it's he formal, okay, because there's a specific subject, there's a specific personal pronoun in the Amharic language which deals with the second person formal and the third person formal. So it's used for people of a high rank or elders or like kings and priests, etc. So we have a preposition le. So we've looked at a few prepositions. We looked at ke, be. Now we're looking at le, which could mean for. In another sense, it might mean two, but here, for. Mengist, which means government. Okay, it could mean kingdom, but we're going to say government because it was the development of the actual government of, the developing modern Ethiopia. Mengist Acho. Acho, as we said, is a possessive. So his formal government, Acho could also mean their government, but in this sense, we're talking about one person. So his formal government, not formal. Formal isn't part of the translation. When I say formal, I mean that the his is the formal pronoun of his. Okay, if it was his non-formal, it would be Mengistu, Mengistu. But here, because it's formal, Mengistacho. Okay, Le Mengistacho Sira. Sira, as we looked at here, would be best translated as tasks because he was appointed over many tasks, over some tasks. But here we're talking about the general work of the kingdom, this governmental work. For the work of his government, for the work of his government. And when you have something which possesses something which is being possessed, like for example, the work here belongs to the government, the thing which is possessing precedes the thing which was possessed. And if the le wasn't present, you'd see another preposition which is ye. Whenever you have ye, which means of, so um, uh, of his government work, which means the work of his government. Okay. And if you have another preposition which is added on to that ye, it always overrides the ye. So all the other prepositions are more powerful than the ye, but we know that the ye is present in there, even though it's not visible. Tamang and na teguh. Okay. Trustworthy and diligent. So we have a word, sort of adjective. One of them is Amharic. Teguh, however, comes from the Giz, and they're joined by the conjunction in na. Okay. Then we have mahona chon. Okay, so this is an infinitive verb. So hona is the dictionary form for he became. Okay, but mehon is the infinitive verb meaning to be. In this sense, however, it's not to be in the infinitive verb sense, but here it's being used as a verbal noun. Okay, so another reason why the ing might be used in the English language, aside from the gerundive, would be to describe a verbal noun. Okay, there's other ways to describe the verbal noun, but this is one of them. So his being, um, Mahona Chon, his being, his formal being. So not their being, which would look exactly the same, but his formal being. And we know that it's not there because of the context. We're not talking about multiple people here. We're talking about one person. So when it translates into the English language, it would still be his and not there. So his being. And then we have the object pronoun. The object marker here, which is ne. So this ne, when it's added onto any noun or relative clause, etc., if we add this ne, we know that the thing that it's attached to is the object of the sentence. This is how we identify the object of the sentence. If the object is not a pronoun. Sometimes the object pronouns can be added onto the end of the verb. But if it's a noun, then we add the n here. Okay, so as we said, this mahona cho is being used as a verbal noun. So therefore the n is added on to show that it's the object. We'll look at this, we'll revisit this, because if we make a direct translation of this into English, it doesn't really sit comfortably. So we'll look at how Ullendorff maneuvers around that and manages to make a comfortable translation. Atse Menelik, Atse Menelik, okay, King Menelik, very simple. This is an Amharic, this is a name, this is the name of King Menelik, Atse Menelik. And then moving on, Sila Teraddu T. Sila Teraddut. Sila Teraddut. What does this mean? Sila is another preposition, meaning, it could mean, in this context, it means because. It could also mean about, okay, but in this context, it means because. And Teraddu, in this context, means he was convinced. It could also mean he understood. Could also mean various things, but in this context, it's more like he was convinced. Okay, so we're going to look at why we know that that's what it means when we look at the actual syntax of the clause right now. And then because he was convinced of it, and why do we conclude that we add the it? And this is a direct translation now. So as we said, we need more of a semantic translation. We need more of a translation which is comfortable with English language patterns. But when we're dealing with the direct translation, which is important to understand as well, this is what we conclude. But if we look here, we've added it. And why do we add it? Silateradut, this t on the end is the object pronoun suffix. The object pronoun suffix. In this sense, it just means it. Essentially, it's the third person singular male object pronoun suffix. Could mean he, but here it means it. And if the ending of this verb here, tereddut, which is a simple past verb, if the ending wasn't u, then this ending here would be w. But when you have a simple past verb, or any verb which ends in u, if we add the object pronoun suffix and it's the third person singular masculine, then we add t and not w. Okay, sila tereddut, because he was convinced of it. So if we kind of go backwards now, we can actually see the meaning of the clause which we just looked at. So because King Menelik was convinced that he was, or that he is, trustworthy and diligent for governmental work, after testing him many times, appointing him over certain tasks. Okay? Now it makes a lot more sense. And as you can see, the Amharic syntax is almost the opposite of the English language syntax, which is very interesting. It makes it very difficult to translate. It makes it very difficult to understand what people are saying to you. And I would say that the greatest task that English speakers have when it comes to understanding Amharic is in speech, because your mind is working overtime trying to understand what somebody said to you, because you're not just translating what they're saying, but you are rearranging every part of speech that they've said to you back into English in your mind. And if there's a lot of different elements just to one clause, like this is just one clause, the sentence isn't even finished, and this is just one clause, and look how many gerundives there are in there, and so everything is stacking backwards. Everything is stacking backwards, whereas English speaks, everything comes afterwards. But in the Amharic language, everything comes before, everything's stacked before, leading up to the main point. But in the English language, you'll tend to say the main point and add things on as you go. Um, so it's completely the opposite, completely the opposite. And as we can see, we have to backtrack in order to get a good translation. So because King Menelik was convinced that he is trustworthy and diligent for governmental work, we could say after testing him many times by appointing him over certain tasks. As we can see, even if we make a direct translation, it doesn't sit comfortably with the Amharic, with the in the English language. So we have to make somewhat of a semantic translation. We have to make some adaptations in order to make it sit comfortably within within the English language system. So if we just finish off now, Haya Arat Hamet Idme Salu. Okay, Salu. When he was, Salu is when he was. That's a subordinate conjunction there. When he was. Subordinate verb, when he was. Okay. Alu. Alu has a different meaning by itself, but when it's used with the conjunction, S, Salu, it takes on the meaning when he was. Okay. Haya Arat, Amet, Idme, 24 years of age. 24 years of age. Or 24 years old. Idme means age. Amet means year. And Haya, this sign here is for 20, and this sign here is for 4. 24. Amet, Idme, Salu. Okay. Be, struggling to see just a little bit. Be, Asra Samint Meto, Silsa Samint Ameta Mehret. Be, as we know, we've looked at before, it's a preposition, means in, could also mean through or with, but in this sense it would mean in, because we're talking about a time, so in that time. This sign here is for 10, 800, okay, so the 1800, Silsa, which is 60, 8, 1868, okay. You can see it in the translation here. Yabalam Barasinet Mairig. So as we said, if we look at the translation by Ullendorff, he kept this transliterative translation here. He didn't translate it Balambaras. If we go to the dictionary of Wolf Leslau, we can actually see that Balambaras is a honorific title. This word, this suffix here, net, is very similar to the suffix in the English language, nes, nes. So it's a good way to remember it. They sound quite similar, net and nes. So, you know, we wouldn't really say honorific title nes. That doesn't really make any sense, but we can just summarize it by a rank of honor. A rank of honor. And this word here, mairig, comes from giz, and this means rank. So whenever anyone's raised to a specific rank in Ethiopia, they receive what's called mairig. Mairig, they are raised to a specific mairig, or are appointed to or ordained to mairig. Okay, and this means a rank. So Yabalim Barasenet mairig. As we said, this ye means of, it's a preposition, and this is used to show possession. Okay, so as we said, the thing that's possessing is the thing that goes first, and the ye goes before that thing. So essentially, this would be um, a rank of honor, a rank of honor. So in the English language, you would take